He said my name like a curse, not a blessing. I was 58, the oldest of 3, and somehow still the least trusted. The lawyer's office smelled of lilac polish and stale air, the same scent my mother once used on the wooden banister back home. That familiarity softened nothing. The moment the envelope was unsealed, every breath in the room grew cautious. My brother Mark straightened his tie. My sister Ellen avoided my eyes. The letter was from my father, written weeks before his death. It should have been his goodbye, but it felt more like a judgment. His handwriting, sharp, deliberate, read like scripture. The will divided the estate into pieces, each name following a careful pause, until mine never came. The lawyer's tone remained dry, but his eyes betrayed the shock. "There's an amendment," he said, flipping the second page. I heard the paper crackle. It was the sound of a promise tearing in two. My sister leaned forward, her perfume sweet but suffocating. "Go on," she said softly, already knowing what came next. When the hidden clause emerged, it landed like a stone in my chest. The house, our childhood home, was no longer mine to inherit. Instead, it was gifted, in gratitude and companionship, to Ellen. The same woman who hadn't visited father in his final months now stood smiling as if fate itself had chosen her. The scent of lilac deepened, heavy as guilt. I reached for the photograph on the lawyer's desk, a family portrait from decades ago. My father's hand rested on my shoulder in that picture, steady and proud. I could still feel its weight, even as the truth erased it. "Is this a mistake?" I asked, though the answer already coiled inside me. Mark said nothing. Ellen folded her hands like a saint. "Father knew what he wanted," she murmured. "You should accept it." I almost laughed. Accept betrayal dressed as love? Accept being written out of my own bloodline? My pulse beat hard against my throat. "He would never cut me out," I said quietly. Her eyes didn't flinch. "Maybe you never knew him as well as you thought." That single line broke something inside me. Every memory, Sunday roasts, candlelit birthdays, evenings spent polishing the silver cross above the mantel, shattered into disbelief. The warmth of the home that shaped us became proof of my blindness. I inhaled deeply. The lilac scent turned bitter, like something left too long to decay. The lawyer cleared his throat. "There's also a clause restricting contestation," he added, sliding another page across the desk. "It specifies that any challenge to this document forfeits remaining inheritance rights." Ellen's smile widened. "That seems fair, doesn't it?" My hands trembled, not from fear, but fury. I could feel the air around me shift, charged with years of suppressed judgment, of quiet dismissal. I had always been the caretaker, the one who stayed behind when they left. And this was the reward. I stood, chair scraping against marble. "No," I said. "Something's wrong. He wouldn't have done this willingly." Mark muttered, "You're making a scene." "Then let it be one worth remembering." The lawyer's assistant hesitated near the door, uncertain whether to intervene. Ellen reached for her bag with calm precision, a victor collecting spoils. I left before the signatures were dry. Outside, the air was cold and heavy with rain. My reflection in the car window looked older than I felt, lines carved deeper by disbelief than by time. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the letter unfolded before me, the key to the family house glinting beside it. The key was useless now, an artifact of loyalty misplaced. The scent of lilac still lingered on my sleeves, a cruel echo of home. I whispered to myself, "This isn't over." Because betrayal doesn't end with a document. It begins there. And the moment I walked away from that office, I made a silent vow. I would uncover every hidden truth buried in that will, even if it meant tearing apart the legacy that had raised me. The house no longer felt like mine. She signed before I could breathe. The pen moved across the paper like it had been waiting for this day, slow, deliberate, rehearsed. I stood behind her in the lawyer's office, watching the ink dry before I could even grasp what she'd done. My sister's perfume filled the air, lilac with a faint metallic tang, sweet layered over rot. She smiled at the banker, her hand steady as marble. "He trusted me," she said softly. I wanted to believe her. I truly did. But the memory of Father's trembling hand surfaced, the way he could barely hold a teacup those last weeks. He couldn't have signed anything, not without help. And there she was, his help. The same hand that once offered him soup now pressed his name into paper for power. I stared at the page. The signature looked real enough, but there was something off about it. Too even, too clean. The man behind the desk cleared his throat, eyes darting between us. "Everything seems in order," he said, though his voice faltered. When we stepped outside, I asked, "When did you get that done?" She didn't flinch. Before he passed. He wanted peace of mind. Peace of mind. A phrase that now sounded like theft wrapped in silk. I drove straight to the bank, my chest tight with suspicion. The receptionist smiled mechanically as I handed over the copy of the will. "I need to verify the signatures," I said. She hesitated, then took it to the back room. 10 minutes later, a gray-haired clerk called me in. He closed the door behind us, lowering his voice. "This isn't the same signature we have on file. The pressure points differ. Someone guided this stroke by stroke." I felt the air shift, heavy with realization. "Can you document that?" He nodded slowly. "Not officially, not yet. But I'll log a note in reference ID 41A. I thanked him, though my throat burned. Proof existed, but proof could vanish just as easily. I left with a receipt stamped in red ink, the sound of the printer clicking like a heartbeat. That sound haunted me all the way home, echoing in my ears like Father's cough. The next day, I filed a formal request for verification through a different branch. I wanted it on record. The clerk there, tired eyes, kind tone, glanced at me and whispered, "Signatures can lie, but ink never forgets." Her words followed me outside into the sharp morning air. I could feel the wind against my neck, carrying the faint scent of oil and asphalt from the parking lot. I slipped the stamped receipt into my coat pocket, my fingers brushing the gold ring Father had left me. The one thing Ellen hadn't claimed. It used to symbolize unity. Now it felt like evidence. When I reached my car, the front tire hissed like a warning. A clean, deliberate puncture near the rim. I crouched to touch it, and the air escaped faster, a whispering accusation. Someone didn't want me driving back to that bank. I stood slowly, scanning the empty lot. A black sedan sat 2 rows away, engine idling. My reflection warped in its window. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, someone watching, waiting. But when I blinked, it was gone. Fear was supposed to stop you, but in that moment, it only clarified my resolve. If they wanted silence, they'd chosen the wrong person. That night, I laid the documents on my kitchen table under the yellow lamp. The paper smelled faintly of perfume and ink, both fading, both toxic. The ring glinted beside it, catching light like it knew something I didn't. I pressed my fingertips to the signature, smooth, almost perfect. Too perfect. I whispered to the empty room, "He didn't sign this. You did." The shadows felt closer than usual. The house creaked. I tucked the receipt and the letter into a folder marked Verification Record 02B, sealing it as if my future depended on it, because it did. Every sound that night reminded me of that pen scratching across paper. Each whisper of wind against the window carried her voice, calm, convincing, rehearsed. But I had learned something Father never did. Trust can be forged as easily as ink. And if she'd stolen his signature once, she could do it again. The ink bled faster than truth. The key was gone, but the drawer wasn't empty. For hours I sat in Father's study with the curtains half drawn, the late afternoon light spilling across the desk like dusted gold. The air felt too still, too patient, like the house was watching me. Silence had stopped being peaceful. It had become punishment. I tried every key on his old ring, every one I'd found inside the rusted tin box by his bed. None fit. The last one snapped clean in the lock, as if the drawer was guarding its own secret. I stared at it, at the grain of the wood that still smelled faintly of polish. "You always hid things too well," I whispered. Then I took the smallest screwdriver I could find, slid it under the handle, and pried. The crack echoed down the hallway. Inside I found dust, a pen, and one folded letter, half burned at the edges, like someone had tried to erase it but changed their mind halfway through. The paper's texture caught against my fingertips, rough as dried skin. I unfolded it slowly, afraid the ash would crumble into nothing. The letter was short, scrawled in my father's handwriting, a few lines about a transfer worth $72,000 and a name that wasn't his, Ellen's. My pulse quickened. The ink bled near the bottom, but I could still read one phrase clearly. Final payment. My hands trembled. Final payment for what? The scent of smoke clung faintly to the page. It wasn't just burnt. It was silenced. Someone wanted this gone. I sat back, the chair creaking under me. My throat felt tight as if the room itself had closed in. I pressed the letter against my palm, feeling the uneven ridges of its handwriting. Father's style, but heavier, more forced. The house made its own noises, the clock ticking, wood settling, but all I could hear was that faint scratch of pen over paper, echoing from memory. I remembered the night he'd called Ellen to the study. I'd stood in the hallway hearing their voices muffled by the door. She'd said, "It has to be done now," and he'd replied, "Not this way." I never asked what this was. I thought it was about the will. I was wrong. The discovery hit like a confession left too late. This wasn't ambition. It was orchestration. Every smile, every soft touch at his bedside was part of a performance written in ink and fire. I placed the letter flat on the desk, aligning the edges as if neatness could contain the truth. Then I noticed something else. The faint outline of a cross pressed into the surface beneath the lamp. It was where Father used to rest his hand when he wrote. The imprint remained, though his hand never would. That cross had once symbolized faith. Now it marked evidence. I reached for my phone to call Mark, but no one answered. I tried the housekeeper. Voicemail. Even the line at the bank rang endlessly. I stared at the phone, realizing that everyone had gone quiet at the same time. The house, once so full of noise and family, felt hollow. My reflection in the glass of the bookcase looked like a stranger squatting in someone else's life. I folded the letter again, slipping it into an envelope. On the back, I wrote the date and one line. Proof of silence. Reference B12. My hands still smelled faintly of smoke from the burnt paper. The weight of it sat in my lap like guilt that wouldn't move. I looked around. The photographs, the dust, the dim light, the stillness. And it struck me. The home that once sheltered me now conspired against me. The hallway creaked behind me. I turned. Nothing. Just shadows stretching too far for comfort. I placed the envelope inside my coat, locked the study, and pressed the broken key into the crack of the doorframe, like a marker for whoever came next. The letter's edges still burned beneath my touch. Numbers tell no lies, only debts. The banker's office was small, lit by one flickering lamp that hummed above her desk. The light trembled across the glass walls like something alive, uncertain. She leaned forward, tapping her keyboard. I could hear the soft rhythm of the keys, the way truth sometimes sounds before it appears. 4 transactions, each withdrawal exactly $18,000. 4 times, $72,000 in total. The numbers lined up like soldiers, perfect, obedient, damning. She turned the monitor slightly so I could see. All within a month, she said. Same account, same authorization signature. I stared at the screen, at the neat row of zeros that looked almost elegant in their cruelty. Can you tell where it went? Her eyes flicked up, hesitant. Into a trust, she whispered. Not yours. The hum of the lamp grew louder. The air around us felt heavy, almost electric. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Whose trust?" She hesitated again. That pause said more than any confession could. "A name matching, Ellen." The paper tray groaned as the printer began to spit out evidence. 4 sheets, one after another, stamped with the institution's insignia and a reference ID, banking record 41B. The scent of warm paper rose from the tray, sharp and faintly metallic. When she handed them to me, her hand shook slightly. "Someone's trying to erase this trail," she murmured. "You shouldn't have found it." I pressed the copies flat against the desk, feeling their heat like freshly minted lies. "I had to." The banker, Anna, lowered her voice. "Be careful who you trust with this. Money isn't all that moves in silence." I nodded. Outside the glass walls, the bank was too quiet, too polished. I saw my reflection layered against the hallway mirror, pale, older, blurred by the trembling light. For a moment, it looked like I was fading out of my own life, replaced by someone more dangerous. I asked for duplicates, sealed and signed. She printed 2 more sets. I folded one, slid it into my coat pocket, and kept the other tucked beneath my arm. It felt like carrying a live wire. On my way out, I stopped beside the security counter. If someone accesses this account again, I want to be notified. The guard looked uneasy. "That's above my level, ma'am." "Then write it down anyway." He nodded, scribbling on a clipboard. Another silent witness. When I stepped into the parking lot, the evening light was harsh, slicing across the windshields. I stood for a moment beside my car, watching the sunlight hit the documents through the envelope's thin surface. The glow made the paper look radioactive, like it might burn through the fabric. I drove home slowly, my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. Every passing car felt like a shadow trailing mine. Inside my bag, the folder rustled with each turn. It wasn't just proof. It was poison waiting for exposure. At the red light, I unfolded one of the copies and stared again at the pattern. 4 withdrawals, each precisely $18,000. I could almost hear my sister's voice, calm and rehearsed. He trusted me. But trust leaves fingerprints, and hers were all over this ledger. I parked in front of my house and cut the engine. The reflection in the mirror caught my face again, worn, resolute, almost unrecognizable. I realized something in that still image. She hadn't just stolen money. She'd stolen the story of who I was supposed to be. I stepped inside, placed the records under the lamp on my dining table, and watched as the light flickered across her name, neat, practiced, unforgivable. Proof was now a weapon, but a dangerous one to hold. And the first thing I saw when the paper cooled beneath the bulb was the line that ended it all, her name inked beside my ruin. His voice broke before the truth did. The phone rang past midnight, slicing through the kind of silence that only exists when even guilt has gone to sleep. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But curiosity is a cruel instinct. It dresses itself as courage. The line crackled, then a man's voice, low, tight, on the edge of breaking. "They know you filed the inquiry," he said. My pulse froze. "Who is this?" Static swallowed his breath. "They know. Don't trust the firm. Don't—" The call cut. No click, no goodbye, just absence. The kind that lingers. The air in the room felt colder, as if the sound itself had drained the warmth. I stared at the clock. 12:17 a.m. The ticking grew louder, sharp against the stillness. I replayed the voicemail twice before saving it under reference ID 52A, just in case. The tone, the hesitation, the unspoken warning, all of it pressed on my chest like a hand I couldn't see. For a moment, I stood there, phone still in hand, staring at my own reflection in the dark window. A face blurred by shadow, lit only by the weak lamp behind me. Fear has a way of making you look like your own ghost. I locked the door, twice, then the windows, drew the curtains closed. My house was small, but every corner suddenly felt too open, too reachable. The next morning, sunlight offered no comfort. The voicemail echoed in my mind while I brewed coffee, the gurgle of the pot almost mocking the tremor in my hand. Around 10, someone knocked on the door, 3 soft taps. I froze. Another knock, gentle but insistent. I peered through the faux peephole. She stood there, Ellen, calm as prayer, dressed in pale gray, holding a bouquet of lilies. I opened the door halfway. "You're making a mistake," she said. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. There was something rehearsed in it, a calm born from knowing you've already won. "I'm busy," I replied. "This isn't about business," she said, stepping closer. "You're stirring ghosts. Let them rest." "Like you let Father rest?" Her fingers tightened around the flowers. "Don't twist things. You're grieving, that's all. You always needed someone to blame." "You forged his name," I said. The words came out low, controlled. "You took his trust and sold it." She blinked, too slowly. "I did what was necessary." "For who?" "For everyone." That word, everyone, hung in the air like smoke. I stepped back and closed the door, quietly. No slam, no shout, just the click of separation. I leaned against the door and exhaled. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from restraint. I needed to act, but emotion couldn't lead now. I called my lawyer, John. He answered on the 3rd ring. "I need you to trace a call I got last night," I said. "It's serious." He sighed. "Send me the number." Within the hour, he called back. His tone was careful. "The call was routed through the firm's network, internal relay. Whoever made it wanted you to know but not be found." My stomach tightened. "Someone in your office?" "I can't say that, but you're not denying it." He paused. "Watch your back, and don't call me from your house again." The line went dead. I sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking beside me, louder now. Every second sounded like it was counting down to something unseen. I replayed the voicemail once more, the static, the fear in the stranger's voice. It wasn't warning me to stop. It was warning me that I'd already gone too far. That night, I moved through the house quietly, checked every lock, every window latch. The faint hum of the refrigerator became unbearable. Even the floorboards seemed to whisper when I walked. I told myself I wasn't scared, just cautious. But when I turned off the lights and stood in the dark, I realized the truth. Caution is only fear pretending to be discipline. The clock ticked on, relentless. Somewhere beyond the walls, a car idled for too long, engine low and patient. I didn't move. I let the silence stretch until it began to breathe. When I finally climbed into bed, the phone lay beside me, screen dark. I didn't dare turn it off. Because silence, I learned that night, isn't peace. It's a warning. And silence became my only defense. They said she was dying, but the report said otherwise. That was the story she sold to everyone, the neighbors, the cousins, even the priest who had buried Father. I remember how her voice quivered just enough to be convincing, how her eyes shimmered at the exact moments grief demanded. But grief, I was learning, had become her costume. When she announced her illness, no one questioned her. "Stage 4, she whispered at the dinner table, holding her chest like it might stop beating. Everyone gasped. I just watched. Something about the timing felt rehearsed. My father's estate had been finalized 2 weeks earlier, and now, suddenly, she was fragile enough to demand sympathy. I told myself not to chase ghosts, but the ghosts were sending mail. That morning, I received an unsigned envelope slid under my door. Inside, a folded hospital admission slip stamped with yesterday's date. Her name, the clinic logo. And at the bottom, 2 words that burned through the paper. Patient discharged. Stable. The scent of antiseptic hit before I even reached the clinic. That sterile tang clung to everything. Floors, curtains, even the silence. I walked straight to the records window, the one marked Authorized Access Only. The clerk looked up, surprised. Young, kind eyes, hesitant hands. His name tag read, Ben. "I need a file," I said, keeping my voice steady. Patient Ellen Moore. He frowned. Family? Something like that. He hesitated, then motioned for me to wait. I watched him disappear through the swinging door, the faint squeak of rubber soles against tile echoing like a countdown. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally he returned, file in hand, expression uneasy. This was supposed to be restricted, he said quietly. But something's wrong with the entry. Look. He opened the file. The admission note was handwritten. My sister's looping script, every Y ending in a sharp curl, the same flourish she'd used on Father's will. But beneath it, the attending physician's digital report told another story. Routine checkup, no terminal diagnosis, patient discharged, stable condition. I stared at it, my pulse slowing to something dangerous. She faked it, I said. Ben nodded, lowering his voice. If anyone finds out I showed you this, I'm done here. You won't be, I promised. I'll protect you. He hesitated again, then slid the page into a manila envelope. Take it. But be careful. She's not sick. She's calculating. When I stepped outside, the late afternoon light felt sharp, almost sterile itself. I sat in my car and unfolded the document again. The ink smelled faintly of chemicals, the antiseptic scent still clinging to the paper. It wasn't just proof. It was motive in print. She had weaponized sympathy. Every tear she shed was currency. Every whispered goodbye had been an investment. At home, I spread the papers under my lamp. The glow traced her handwriting like a confession written in disguise. My hand hovered above it, unwilling to touch. I could almost hear her voice from the dinner. That night, I just want peace before I go. No, she didn't want peace. She wanted control. I picked up the phone and called John, my lawyer. When he answered, I didn't bother with greetings. She's not dying, I said. I have the medical file. It's falsified. He sighed heavily. Are you sure? Her handwriting's on it. She faked the notes, and someone signed off. Then we escalate, he said. Legally this time. No more quiet inquiries. I agreed, though the idea of public exposure made my stomach twist. But truth, I'd realized, isn't gentle. It's invasive, like antiseptic poured over a wound. It burns before it heals. That night, I sat under the lamp, the envelope still open beside me. The paper looked innocent, almost pure. But every line on it carried a lie dressed as mercy, the kind that made people kneel instead of fight. I folded the document carefully and placed it in my drawer with the others. Financial records, bank statements, now this. Each proof a step closer to tearing down the illusion she'd built. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against the window like an impatient reminder. They said she was dying, I whispered, looking at the papers, but the report said otherwise. And even lies, I learned that night, wear hospital gowns. She brought coffee and conditions. The morning light was thin, colorless, the kind that makes even truth look pale. We met at a cafe across from the courthouse, neutral ground, though nothing about that table felt neutral. She arrived early, already seated, a paper cup before her, and a folder too thick for honesty. Her lawyer joined moments later, polished and pleasant, the kind of man who could make deceit sound procedural. He smiled, setting his briefcase between us. We all want peace, don't we? Peace. The word hung like steam between us, visible, empty. He leaned forward, sliding a paper across the table. A settlement. $10,000. You withdraw the complaint, and we consider the matter resolved. $10,000. I looked at the number, neat and small, printed in bold as if certainty could mask insult. The taste of my coffee turned bitter on my tongue, as though it had absorbed the truth of what he was offering. Silence for sale. I took a slow sip, more to buy time than to drink. That's the price of dignity now? He didn't flinch. It's generous, considering the ambiguity. Ambiguity. Another word that sounded like a threat dressed for church. She didn't speak, just watched me with that same practiced calm, her ring catching the morning light every time she lifted her cup. That glint had always meant victory to her, even when she was wrong. "I don't want your money," I said finally. "Keep it. I want the truth recorded, not erased." Her lawyer sighed softly, as if I were the unreasonable one. "If you refuse, this will only get uglier." "It already is." I pushed the folder back toward him. The motion was deliberate, slow enough that the paper rasped against the table, a sound that somehow carried more weight than the conversation itself. For a moment, no one spoke. The cafe's doorbell jingled as someone entered, laughter spilling in with the cold. Ordinary life happening outside our little war. Then she stood. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "You don't know how deep this goes." "I don't need to," I replied. "Depth doesn't scare me anymore." Her eyes softened, just slightly. Then she turned, leaving her half-empty coffee behind. I watched her walk away, her figure framed by sunlight too sharp to be merciful. When I finally stood, the seat beneath me felt colder, as if the decision itself had drained the warmth. I left the cafe without finishing my drink. By the time I reached the courthouse steps, the bitterness lingered, not from the coffee, but from the price she thought I'd accept. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed twice before dying. When I tried again, the screen blinked insufficient funds. My account, frozen. Every statement now a map of withheld power. I called the bank, waited 22 minutes on hold. The representative's voice was polite, mechanical. "A temporary administrative hold," she explained, "pending verification of a disputed claim." "What claim?" She paused, the kind that says too much. "I'm not authorized to discuss that, ma'am." I ended the call. The room around me felt suddenly smaller, as if walls could shrink in sympathy. I stared at my father's watch resting on the desk, its hands ticking steadily toward the next hour. That sound had once meant order. Now it measured theft. I took out a pen, opened my notebook, and began drafting the complaint myself. Names, dates, transactions. Every line of deceit set in motion under her control. If she wanted silence, she'd learn that silence can be documented too. The sun dipped low as I finished. Outside, the courthouse lights blinked on, sterile and bright. I folded the document, sealed it, and signed my name at the bottom. The ink bled faintly into the paper, spreading like something alive. Justice no longer wore her face. Justice now had my signature. The ATM swallowed my card like it knew me. It was early, cold, the kind of morning when the air feels metallic. I stood beneath the glass awning outside the branch, waiting for the machine to spit my card back out. Instead, the screen blinked twice and went black. Then the receipt emerged, thin, trembling from the slot, like a confession forced out of paper. Balance, $0. My hand didn't move for a moment. I just stared at those numbers. 2 zeros, wide as eyes, empty as intent. The texture of the slip felt brittle, like it had already lived too long. When I folded it, the edge tore clean, through the middle, a wound in cellulose. I stepped inside. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. Behind the counter, a young officer adjusted her glasses, smiling automatically. "How may I help you?" "My account," I said. "It's been drained." Her smile faltered. "Name?" I gave it. She typed. The keyboard clicks filled the silence. Then her eyes shifted, not quite meeting mine. "It shows here. The funds were placed under an internal hold. Authorized transfer from a family representative." "Family," I repeated. The word struck like a false note in a familiar song. "Which one?" "I'm not allowed to disclose that," she said quietly. "Then disclose it anyway." Her fingers trembled. "I shouldn't do it." A long pause, then a whisper. "It matches your sister's authorization signature." I felt the air tighten. Not anger, clarity, the kind that burns slow. "Who verified it?" I asked. She hesitated, glancing toward the glass doors leading to the manager's office. "A regional seal. Reference ID J42K. That's all I can say." That was enough. I had seen that kind of institutional obedience before, the kind that turns injustice into paperwork. "I'll be submitting a proof response," I said. Officially. The phrase made her blink. Most customers beg, few invoke policy. But she nodded, shoulders straightening as though the words themselves carried weight. I walked to the counter where the complaint forms sat in a neat stack, too white, too clean for what they were about to hold. The pen felt heavy. I wrote slowly, pressing deep into the page. Every letter an anchor, every line an accusation. I invoke the proof response, on-stage artifact submission, I said aloud, knowing the cameras could hear. This is my consent withdrawal. Record it. A man in a gray suit appeared from the hallway. Branch manager, smooth voice. Let's take this to my office, he said, gesturing politely. Inside, the glass walls turned reflections into spectators. He folded his hands. You must understand, these are standard authorizations. Standard theft, you mean? He smiled, the kind that hides behind policy. We require verifiable evidence to challenge a mandate. I reached into my bag and slid across the ledger copy, the one I'd kept sealed since the settlement meeting. The header bore my father's account ID, followed by the 4 withdrawals. Beneath it, a handwritten note signed in my sister's script. His eyes flickered. This is internal documentation. Not anymore, I said. Now it's proof. He leaned back, exhaling. This will take time to review. You'll have 48 hours, I replied. That's not procedure. It is now. You froze my life. I'm unfreezing yours. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he signed the acknowledgement slip. His hand shook slightly as the pen met paper. Outside, the morning light had sharpened, cutting through the lobby's glass like judgment. I stood there, feeling it on my face, cool and unkind. When I stepped back toward the street, the torn receipt still rested in my coat pocket. Proof of both theft and resolve. I unfolded it once more. The tear had widened, splitting the 0 clean in half. The institution had wanted silence. I had given them a record. And for the first time since this began, I felt something shift, not in them, but in me. The seal that kept me contained, cracked. Their seal cracked under my name. Truth stuttered when the oath began. The hearing room was too bright, the kind of fluorescent glare that stripped color from everything, even honesty. It hummed faintly above us, a mechanical heartbeat. The judge's gavel rested idle, its shadow stretching across the polished table like a warning. My palms were dry this time, not from fear, but from readiness. Across from me sat her witness, the woman she'd coached for weeks. She kept adjusting her blazer, her pen clicking nervously. When the clerk asked her to raise her right hand, she hesitated a fraction too long. Do you swear to tell the truth? A pause, then another. Finally, I don't remember. The room shifted. Even the light seemed to flicker in disbelief. My sister leaned forward sharply, whispering something, but it was too late. The hesitation had spoken louder than confession. I could feel every eye in the chamber move between them. The judge, the stenographer, even the bailiff. The air turned brittle. The clerk repeated the question, firmer this time. Do you swear? Yes, I do. But the damage was done. Truth had already flinched, and lies rarely recover from the first stumble. When she began reading her statement, her voice trembled through each line. She was aware of the arrangement, she said, glancing toward my sister. She signed willingly. I saw her do it. The judge leaned forward. You saw her? Her mouth opened, then closed. Her pen rolled off the table, clattering against the tile. The sound echoed like a verdict. I think so. I looked at her hands. They shook as she picked up the pen. That tremor wasn't fear of perjury. It was guilt reaching the surface. The judge raised an eyebrow. You think so? Silence again. My lawyer, seated beside me, nudged the folder toward the bench. Your Honor, may I submit the evidence packet? Permission granted. I stood, sliding the folder forward myself. Inside, the ledger pages, the same ones that had traveled from bank to desk to courtroom, were marked with transfer times, $18,000 withdrawals, matching signatures. "This handwriting," I said softly, "appears on every falsified document, including the will." The judge examined it under the lamp. The light sharpened the ink strokes, each loop of the pen as distinct as a fingerprint. "Who authored these?" he asked. My sister's lawyer cleared his throat. "Objection. No direct attribution." "Overruled," the judge said. "The signatures will be verified." The witness swallowed hard, her eyes darting between the documents and my face. "It looks like hers," she whispered, nodding toward my sister. The court reporter stopped typing for half a breath, just enough for the silence to register. My sister exhaled through her nose, forcing a smile. "People forget," she said. "Paper lies." "No," I said quietly. "People lie. Paper remembers." A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Even the judge's clerk looked up. His pen paused mid-line. The judge straightened. "We will adjourn briefly while the record is reviewed." As he rose, I caught the faint reflection of my sister's face in the polished table. The mask was cracking, just enough to see what lived beneath. The witness avoided her gaze. She reached for her water glass, but her hand missed by an inch. I leaned back in my chair. The sound of my own heartbeat matched the ticking of the courtroom clock. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first breath of justice, a pulse beneath the surface. The arbiter's assistant collected the exhibits. "We'll authenticate the timestamps," she said, sliding them into a folder marked Reference ID H17. I nodded. "Do that. You'll find they align." For the first time in months, I felt control return, not as triumph, but as quiet steadiness. When the judge re-entered, his tone had changed. "We'll need original source verification," he said. "Until then, this court recognizes preliminary inconsistency in the defense affidavit." Preliminary inconsistency. In legal language, that meant one thing: the truth had found its first foothold. My sister turned away, whispering to her lawyer. I caught only fragments: damage control, postpone, reframe. But it was too late. The witness's silence had become the loudest statement of the day. The judge looked up one last time. "We reconvene in 48 hours. Bring your counsel. Bring your honesty." As the room emptied, I gathered the papers and held them to the light. The ink shimmered faintly, a reminder that even shadows leave evidence. Outside, the hallway smelled of polish and cold air. I paused at the door, watching the witness walk ahead, shoulders slumped. She didn't look back, and for once, I didn't need her to, because even silence had taken my side. Windows watched me instead of people. It started with a flicker, a reflection that didn't belong. Morning light had barely touched the dining room when something near the window glinted, too precise to be glass. I pulled back the curtain, and there it was, a small camera, black and cold, tucked neatly behind the fabric. Its lens stared at the table where I ate every morning, where I'd once spoken freely. The temperature of fear changed. It didn't burn this time. It froze. My breath felt heavier than air itself. I touched the edge of the device, half expecting it to blink, to reveal its owner through some terrible instinct. When the police arrived, I was sitting at that same table, hands still trembling, though I'd convinced my voice to stay calm. The officer, a tall man with the kind of eyes that had seen too much, examined the setup carefully. "It's a wireless model," he said, kneeling near the outlet. "Placed intentionally. Someone knew your routines." He logged it into his notebook, writing the words "Surveillance Snapshot, Case ID 299B." The letters looked ordinary, yet I knew they meant something irreversible. My home had become case property. "Do you suspect anyone?" he asked. "Family," I said. "By blood, not by loyalty." He paused, weighing that truth. "We'll open a report. You'll want to change the locks, maybe install motion sensors. Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" "Yes," I lied. He looked around one last time before leaving, pressing a carbon copy of the report into my hand. The paper was warm from his touch, still carrying a trace of the station's stale heat. That faint warmth lingered as the rest of the house turned cold. When the door closed, silence spread like fog. Every sound, every creak in the floor, every hum of the refrigerator felt like a listening ear. I went room to room, opening drawers, checking corners. No more cameras. At least, none that I could find. On the mantel sat a framed photograph of my sister and me at our father's house. Her smile was sharp, the kind that meant she'd already won something. I turned the frame face down. I remembered her last message. "You shouldn't push this any further. Some things aren't meant to be exposed." Now I understood. Exposure terrified her because her lies couldn't survive light. By evening, the air had gone stale. I packed one suitcase, the essentials only, a folder of documents, the police report, 2 photographs, 1 ring. Everything else could rot here if it had to. As I zipped the suitcase, the reflection from the window caught my eye again. I froze. For a second, I swore the curtain had moved. My pulse thudded in my ears. I walked toward it, slow, deliberate. The curtain hung still, but the glass behind it showed me, a faint silhouette standing where the camera once hid. I could see my own outline watching back. That's when I realized, even after removing the device, the feeling didn't leave. The surveillance had shifted from machine to memory. The fear had installed itself inside me. I stepped closer to the glass, my breath fogging the surface. "You wanted me afraid," I whispered. "But fear isn't obedience." The reflection wavered as if it heard. Before leaving, I opened every window in the house. Let the cold air in, let the warmth escape, let whatever presence lingered feel that I was done being observed. The night wind touched my face. It felt cleaner than anything I'd breathed in months. Downstairs, the officer's report lay on the table beside the suitcase. The ink had dried into certainty. Case ID 299B. Proof that even intimidation leaves a paper trail. I locked the front door behind me, then turned once to look at the house. Every window glowed faintly from within, the curtains pulled open now, exposing everything I used to hide. As I walked toward the car, the chill deepened, pressing against my skin. Somewhere behind those walls, silence rearranged itself into memory. The walls had learned my secrets. They said my father's name like a weapon. It hit the walls of the courtroom and came back sharpened. The sound carried weight. 40 years of inheritance, betrayal, and silence, all packed into 2 syllables that once meant protection. Now it was ammunition. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Rows of faces leaned forward, waiting for spectacle. Even the air buzzed with the kind of tension that lives between truth and denial. My sister stood at the front, her lawyer beside her, both wearing composure like armor. I swore the oath. The clerk's voice was steady, but the gavel's echo sounded like judgment already falling. "State your testimony," the judge said. I unfolded the document in front of me, a folder marked Reference ID A37C. The paper shook only slightly, but the microphones picked up everything: the rustle, the breath, the tremor of restraint. On March 3rd, I began. 4 withdrawals were made from the estate account, each amount $18,000, approved through forged signatures. The words fell like stones. Someone in the gallery gasped. Another whispered, "4 times?" I nodded. 4. The handwriting on each document matches the same pattern: loops, spacing, the tilt of a hand pretending not to shake. Her lawyer rose. "Objection, speculation." "Overruled," the judge said, without looking up. I turned to the arbiter seated near the archive records. He gave a brief nod, confirming he'd seen the same evidence. The sound of shuffling papers spread through the benches like a low tide. My sister didn't flinch, but I saw her hand tighten around the edge of her chair. "You're implying intent," her lawyer said. "Can you prove the connection?" I reached for the court transcript folder and held it toward the clerk. Entry log H19, recorded communication with bank officer, timestamp 0942, states verbal authorization from her representative. Same date, same account. The judge leaned forward. "Read the entry aloud." I read. My own voice felt distant, carried more by rhythm than emotion, the monotone of evidence. When I reached the end, the silence cracked into noise. The gallery erupted. Gasps, murmurs, a few curses disguised as coughs. One man in the back stood and shouted, "Read the ledger!" I hesitated. Then I did. 4 withdrawals, $18,000 each. Dates listed, signatures aligned, sequence identical. The sound of my voice collided with the courtroom's stale air, echoing until it found no place left to hide. By the time I finished, the judge had set down his pen. He looked at her, then at me. The clerk's recorder clicked off. The only sound left was the shuffling of robes and the collective exhale of an audience realizing they had just heard the system confront itself. My sister tried to speak, but her voice faltered. The lawyer leaned in, whispering too fast to catch. She shook her head. "I didn't," she began, but the judge raised a hand. "This court will recess," he said. "Pending verification of all financial documents referenced under ID Series A37C through A40. The bailiff stood. The murmuring grew louder, now mixed with the rustle of coats and shifting feet. I watched as the clerk pinned a sheet to the notice board beside the bench. The sound of the pushpin snapping into wood was sharp, final. Notice type: suspension. Authority: court. Detail: pending audit. The words might as well have been carved into the walls. For the first time, the law had paused, not for her defense, but for the truth. I stepped down from the stand. The arbiter approached quietly. "That ledger," he said under his breath. "You did the right thing bringing it." "I didn't bring it for right," I said. "I brought it because no one else would." Outside, reporters waited. Cameras flashed through the glass, though the court barred recording devices inside. I could still hear the crowd murmuring names, hers, mine, my father's, each spoken like ownership. When I reached the door, I turned once more. She sat alone now, her lawyer collecting papers, her face pale under the fluorescent light. For years, she had controlled the story. Who was heir, who was villain, who was disposable. But today, that script had burned. The clerk's pen scratched across the final line of the transcript. The echo lingered like a verdict. They finally stopped calling her the heir. Money trails read like family diaries. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the marble hall, steady, judgmental, unblinking. Every face in that gallery turned toward the auditors seated at the long oak table. Their folders were color-coded, edges aligned, the precision of bureaucracy disguised as calm. One of them cleared his throat. "Our findings," he said, "cover a 6-month period. We've reviewed bank statements, transfer slips, and digital authorizations." Each word struck like a slow drumbeat. He adjusted his glasses and continued. "We've identified repeated forgery, patterns, signatures traced, timestamps altered, and beneficiary designations modified without consent." The air tightened. Somewhere behind me, a camera clicked. Another auditor, a woman with a clipped voice, slid a summary across to the arbiter. "Total unauthorized redirection equals $72,000. All transferred to one trust bearing her signature." Her. The light above us flickered once, a trembling acknowledgement. Even electricity seemed to hesitate before the truth. My sister didn't speak. She only lowered her gaze, her fingers clasped so tightly the knuckles turned white. The arbiter leaned forward. "You are confirming the amount, 72,000? "Yes," the auditor said, flipping to a marked page labeled Financial Record Entry R58. "Every line item is validated. 2 deposits from the estate account, 2 withdrawals disguised as consultant fees." The murmurs began again, a ripple of disbelief rolling through the benches. "She used family funds," someone whispered, "and hid it under her own name." I watched her lawyer rise, face pale beneath courtroom lighting. "Your Honor, we request a delay for independent verification." The arbiter didn't look up. This audit was conducted under court supervision. Verification has already occurred. The lawyer's argument collapsed under the weight of its own formality. The first auditor spoke again, voice steady but not unkind. "This is not merely mismanagement. It's systematic redirection. The evidence stands." Then came the sound I hadn't expected. Applause. Not wild or loud, just a soft, collective rhythm from the back rows. A gesture not of celebration, but relief. After months of silence, the truth had chosen to speak in public. The arbiter reached for his pen. The click echoed louder than any gavel. "Interim freeze order," he said, writing in deliberate strokes. "Effective immediately. All estate-related assets will remain sealed until further notice." He turned the document toward the clerk, who stamped it with official ink. The seal pressed down hard, leaving its impression deep enough to outlast the paper itself. Her fortune, once shield and weapon, was now evidence. My sister finally looked up, eyes glinting in the artificial light. "You think this redeems you?" she said softly. "That exposing me repairs what's broken?" I met her stare. "No, it just stops the bleeding." The crowd hushed again. Even the auditors froze, their pens suspended mid-note. She leaned back, exhaling through a half-smile that carried exhaustion, not victory. For the first time, I saw her as she truly was, cornered not by hatred, but by proof. The arbiter signed the last page. "This court acknowledges receipt of audit summary reference R58 and its appendices," he said, voice formal, steady. "Pending further examination, these records are to be treated as verified financial evidence." The clerk repeated the words as she filed the papers into an envelope, sealing it shut. When she pressed the wax stamp over the edge, the heat from it rose faintly into the air. That was the only warmth left in the room. I turned to leave, my footsteps echoing across the polished floor. Behind me, the crowd began to disperse, their voices soft, reverent. Outside, the corridor lights buzzed. The same fluorescent hum followed me down the hallway, persistent, electric, unyielding. Justice hadn't roared. It had documented, and in that documentation, it had done what no apology ever could. Her fortune turned into evidence. They made me read my grief into record. The courtroom felt colder than any winter I'd known. The walls held their silence like an oath. A single microphone waited on the wooden stand, its wire coiled like a question no one wanted to ask. I unfolded the paper. The texture was rough, slightly torn at the corner, as if it had already endured more than it should. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from memory. "I lost a home," I began, voice steady though it cracked halfway through. "I lost laughter that once filled it. I lost faith that family meant safety." Each sentence was a wound reopened. I could hear the scratching of pens, the clerk's careful typing, the shifting of people in their seats. Somewhere near the back, a chair creaked. Too loud, too human. "The trust my father built," I continued, "was not in money. It was in his belief that honesty could survive inheritance. I believed that too, until it was rewritten into ledgers." The words bled out of me like confession. The judge looked up, neither sympathetic nor distant, simply present. He nodded once, and that nod meant more than pity ever could. It meant acknowledgement. My sister sat 3 rows ahead. Her posture was still perfect, chin raised, eyes unreadable. I didn't speak her name. I didn't need to. Every person in the room knew the shape of my silence. I turned a page. The sound of paper folding echoed softly through the chamber. "There were 4 withdrawals," I said quietly. "Each one justified as care. But care isn't a signature forged in shadow." Someone in the audience sighed. The court reporter paused her typing for a moment, perhaps to wipe her eyes, perhaps to steady her breath. My ally, the gatekeeper, stood near the bench, holding a folder of correspondence. He had once told me, "Truth is slow, but it never forgets where it's going." Today, it arrived. As I neared the end, I felt my throat tighten. "The cost wasn't $72,000, I said. "It was the years it took to believe in trust again." The judge's pen rested on the table. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then he said, Let the statement be entered into the record in full. It was done. My pain had become official. The air changed. Not lighter, not free, but clean. The weight hadn't disappeared. It had simply been transferred, from me to the page, from secrecy to truth. I folded the document once more. My fingerprints left faint marks where the ink had smudged. The paper felt alive, like it had absorbed part of my voice, part of my father's unfinished story. As I stepped down from the stand, a quiet ripple went through the crowd. No applause, no gasps this time, only a shared stillness. People looked at me not as a witness, not as an accuser, but as someone who had survived the arithmetic of loss. The clerk rose and placed the signed statement into an envelope marked Personal Record Reference L23. Her hands brushed mine briefly, a human gesture in a procedural world. The gatekeeper caught my eye. He didn't smile, just gave a nod that said, "It's over now. You've done enough." Outside the chamber, sunlight sliced through the blinds, thin and hesitant, touching the marble floor like mercy learning how to walk. Closure doesn't arrive like thunder. It arrives like dawn, quiet, inevitable, unforgiving. As I walked past the doorway, a reporter called out, "What do you want them to remember most?" I paused, looked back once, and said, "That silence has a name," and I finally spoke mine. They finally called me by my name. It fit the lock, but not the memory. Weeks had passed since the hearing, and the noise of justice had quieted into routine. Then, one morning, a courier arrived, formal, polite, carrying a white envelope sealed with red wax. The scent of it struck first, faintly sweet, paper and closure intertwined. My hands hesitated before breaking the seal. Inside was a letter of transfer, stamped and notarized. The title deed. The house was mine again. The arbiter had written in his own hand, "Ownership restored, legal claim settled. No flourish, no sympathy, just law made human for once." The drive to the old house was silent. Even the trees seemed to lean away from the road, as if guarding the memory of what once happened there. When I reached the gate, the iron hinges protested. The paint had peeled, the grass had grown wild, and yet something inside me whispered. It waited. The key was still cold when it turned. The lock clicked, reluctant but obedient. For a moment I stood there, half expecting a voice, a footstep, the ghost of a promise, but the air was still. Inside, dust floated like soft snow under the thin afternoon light. Each step I took stirred something familiar, echoes, regrets, old laughter that no longer hurt to remember. The scent of wax from the envelope still lingered on my fingers. It mixed now with the musty air of the place, forming something new, something bearable. The first room was smaller than I remembered. Maybe it had always been that way, and time had only stretched it in memory. I traced my hand along the wall where my father once marked our heights in pencil. The lines had faded, but I could still feel the indentations. In the living room, I found the mantel bare. I reached into my bag and brought out the small wooden cross that had traveled with me through every hearing, every sleepless night. I set it back on the mantel. "Welcome home," I whispered. The silence answered softly, not empty, kind. For a long while I simply stood there, not victorious, not even relieved, just still. I realized the house had always been a witness, not a prize. What we fight for sometimes only matters because of who we become while losing it. The arbiter's ally had once told me, "Justice isn't a sound, it's a record." He was right. The court transcript, the audits, the ledgers, all of them had led to this quiet moment. Justice didn't roar. It documented, it signed, and then it stepped aside. I walked to the window and opened it. The scent of the garden came in, damp soil, faint jasmine, and the ghost of spring. I hadn't noticed how long the air had been waiting to breathe. On the table near the door lay a mirror I'd left behind years ago. Its glass had fogged slightly, but my reflection looked back, lined and calm. Not younger, not older, just real. I whispered, He'd be proud, wouldn't he? The light shifted through the curtains like an answer. I took one last look at the deed still in my hand. Official letterhead, inked signatures, embossed stamp. At the bottom, beneath the final line, the arbiter had written something else in pen. Return acknowledged. It wasn't just paperwork, it was a declaration that the house, the trust, the family name had been unburied from lies. I folded the deed and placed it inside a drawer. For the first time, I locked the door from the inside. Outside, a breeze passed through the open window, carrying the faint scent of wax once more. The papers rustled on the table as if the house itself exhaled. Peace didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, and it stayed. Peace signed its own document. Numbers can't heal, but they confess. The accountant's office was quiet, except for the faint hum of the desk lamp. Its light fell across a spread of papers, columns, signatures, margins annotated in his tidy hand. Outside, dusk pressed gently against the window, washing the room in muted amber. He looked up once, then back down at the ledger. All reconciled, he murmured. Balance restored. The word balance lingered in the air longer than it should have. I watched his pen move one last time, drawing a short line beneath the total. No surplus, no deficit, just zero. A perfect circle of fairness that didn't feel like victory, only completion. It's clean, he said, turning the final page toward me. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. The faint warmth from its bulb touched my wrist as I leaned closer. The scent of paper, dust, and ink formed the last sensory record of this long chapter of my life. I nodded, tracing a finger over the embossed seal that confirmed the audit's conclusion. So it's done, I whispered. Done, he repeated, though his tone held the gravity of burial rites more than celebration. For months I had watched numbers turn into ghosts, withdrawals, deposits, discrepancies, each one a footprint of betrayal. But now the figures sat quietly on the page, harmless again, stripped of motive. He closed the ledger gently, as though silence could preserve its truth. You could appeal for restitution, he said. The court left room for it. I smiled faintly. Restitution is arithmetic. I'm looking for peace. He paused, then said softly, Even arithmetic seeks balance, not grace. The lamp's glow caught the rim of his glasses. His reflection looked like two small orbs of light staring back, calculating, but kind. As he gathered the papers, one loose sheet drifted to the floor. I picked it up. The ink had bled slightly where a drop of water, perhaps sweat, perhaps a tear, had fallen. Beneath the printed total was a handwritten note, ledger reference H47, verified final entry. I folded it carefully, not because I needed it, but because it symbolized something larger than justice. It was proof that chaos could be measured, that damage could at least be named. He stood, extending his hand. You did what many wouldn't, he said. You finished it. I didn't finish it, I replied. It finished me. I just kept the books open until it stopped. He chuckled once, low and brief. Then his expression softened. Then maybe that's what truth really is, an ending that adds up. I glanced around his office one last time. The air carried the faint hum of the fluorescent fixture above. A clock on the wall ticked toward 7. 7 hours since I'd arrived. 7 hours since the final review began. One of two exact numbers I would remember. Outside, the streetlights flickered to life. The second number appeared in the reflection, the same hour my father used to close his shop, his hands always dusted with ink from his own ledgers. I'd inherited more than I realized. As I stepped out, the door clicked softly behind me. The sound echoed like a seal pressed into wax. Final. Irrevocable. Walking toward the street, I thought of every account I'd balanced, every truth I'd recalculated to survive. Numbers couldn't absolve. They could only bear witness. They told the story without adjectives, without lies. The world outside was dim, but steady. The light from the accountant's lamp followed me faintly through the glass, then vanished. For once, I didn't need to look back. The ledger was closed, and in its quiet symmetry, I finally understood. Justice doesn't repay, it rebalances. Even math needed mercy. He said my name like a curse, not a blessing. The words returned as if time itself had been waiting to finish its sentence. The town memorial stood before me, stone, glass, and silence woven into memory. Morning light passed through the stained windows, scattering color across the floor like confetti made of forgiveness. In my hands, I held a photograph of my father. The edges were worn, the corners soft from years of being folded and unfolded, as if truth had fingerprints. The picture caught the light just right, turning his face almost alive again. His eyes, calm, steady, watched me as though asking whether it had all been worth it. "It was," I whispered. Every page, every ledger, every courtroom word. Behind me, footsteps approached. The protector stood quietly at my side, the same ally who once shielded me from the worst of the noise. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He had been there when justice was paperwork and heartbreak disguised as evidence. "I thought you'd never come back here," he said softly. "I didn't come back," I replied. "I moved forward and found myself here." He nodded, a gesture of understanding that carried years of silence. Around us, townspeople gathered near the square, faces once skeptical, now softened by the kind of recognition that only comes when the truth has survived long enough to become undeniable. One woman pressed a hand to her chest as I passed. Another offered a quiet, respectful nod. Forgiveness rarely arrives as applause. It arrives as eye contact. The church bell struck 9. 9, the same hour my father used to unlock the shop doors, the same number of weeks since the final hearing. Numbers had followed me like ghosts, but today they sounded less like reminders and more like rhythm. The memorial inscription read, "In honor of those who built trust with their hands and guarded it with their hearts." I traced the carved letters, my fingers trembling slightly against the stone. The sunlight shifted, pooling over the word, trust. I could smell the faint wax of the candles inside, their heat bending the air. That was the chapter's only scent, something human, fragile, and still burning. My sister was there too, standing near the back. She didn't hide anymore, nor did she approach. Her posture had changed. The defiance was gone. When our eyes met, there was no plea, no apology, just distance, honest and deserved. She mouthed something, perhaps my name, perhaps a word I was finally free not to hear. I turned back to the photo and said, "You taught me that love without accountability is chaos." The protector stepped forward, placing a folded document beside the memorial plaque. "This is the community fund setup," he said. "Your request went through. It'll help widows rebuild their businesses. You wanted it to carry his name." "Not his name," I corrected softly. "His principle." The folder bore the seal of approval, stamped and dated. It was more than paperwork. It was a circle closing without vengeance. The sunlight caught the photograph again, glowing through the thin film of glass. I saw both of us reflected there, me and the man I'd spent a lifetime trying to honor. The same reflection I once ran from now looked back with quiet acceptance. The protector broke the silence. "You think peace lasts?" "It doesn't need to," I said. "It just needs to return often enough to be remembered." The wind moved gently through the open courtyard, carrying the sound of leaves brushing stone. I thought of the house, its empty rooms now filled only with clean air. Its echo no longer haunted me, it hummed with light, the kind that doesn't blind, but restores. I placed the photograph at the base of the memorial, next to a single white cross carved into the foundation. My father's name gleamed faintly beneath it, refracted through the stained glass sun. The protector bowed his head. "So this is it?" "Yes," I said. "The story began with his curse. It ends with clarity." The bell rang again, one last resonance that seemed to travel farther than sound should. I closed my eyes and felt it fade, not into silence, but into peace. The people dispersed. The square emptied. Only the light remained, soft against the stone, gentle as breath. The curse became my closure.